All right, everybody. Quiz on Unit 3. It's really the only quiz on Unit 3, so I didn't really specify. But as you know, it's over unit circle stuff and graphing all trig functions. The entire quiz is no calculator, as you can see there. But we will have 6 questions, mixture of radians and degrees for the unit circle questions. So for the sine of 30, now remember, time, you have the whole time. So you can go a little slower. You can maybe draw triangles if that helps you. But I'm assuming everyone knows the sine of 30 is 1/2. 30 is really pi over 6. I know you're used to the radians, but this is 1/2. Cotangent of pi. If you need something to reference to, you could use these points. Pi, as you know, is over here. This is slope, right? So the slope of this line, the tangent, is 0. When you flip over 0, you get undefined. 5 pi over 4. Now you know that the cosine is radical 2 over 2. So we got to flip that over. So we're dealing with 2 over radical 2, which we'll have to fix. And we get 2 radical 2 over 2. So the answer is radical 2. Now, the plus or minus sign comes from the location. 5 pi over 4. Here's 4 pi over 4. 5 pi over 4 lives right here. All scholars take calculus, so only the tangent's positive, so this guy's negative. Cosine of 2 pi over 3. Now, if the sine of pi over 6 is 1/2, then the cosine of pi over 3 is also going to be 1/2. So we know that it's 1/2. Plus or minus sign, of course. 2 pi over 3 is over here, and only the sine is positive, so that's negative. Tangent of 270 degrees. We're down here. That line right there is very, very steep, too steep for a slope, so it's undefined. Cosecant is 7 pi over 6. Pi over 6, we're dealing with really the sine of pi over 6, so we know that that's 1/2, but we got to flip it over, so it's 2. 7 pi over 6 lives right here, and we know that only the sine is only positive here or here, so we know that that's going to be negative 2. You'll have one question, like problem number 7, where you will be given some information to set up your triangle, and you will be asked to give one of the 6 trig functions. Not all 6, just one of the 6. So if we're told that the cotangent is 9 over 10, and we're in quadrant 3, we're here, quadrant 3, right triangle. Now, you might not be so good at cotangent, but you know that the tangent is the opposite over adjacent. So we're dealing with adjacent over opposite. Here's your angle right here. So the adjacent side is 9, and the opposite side is 10. So you're going to need to use Pythagorean theorem to figure out the hypotenuse. 9 squared plus 10 squared equals your hypotenuse squared. I'll just call it x. So 181 equals x squared. So we're going to take the square root of 181. Of which I don't believe it simplifies, so we're going to leave it like that. So cosecant, again for cosecant, you might not be good at cosecant, but you know that the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So we're dealing with hypotenuse over opposite, so the cosecant of theta is going to be radical 181 over the opposite, which is 10. All scholars take calculus, so only the tangent's positive there, so the negative answer is the correct one. Now for your graphs. You will draw your own axes. Make sure you label those axes. You will not be asked for all the parts. You will only be asked to state the periods. You may need to make a note to yourself or whatever you have else you need to write down. Hopefully by this point you know what it is that helps you. So for secant, we know the period's 2 pi over b, and the b is located right here. So it's 2 pi over 3. Because we're drawing the cosine we know we need the amplitude. The amplitude is 1. So you're going to need to indicate the ones on the y-axis so that we know where that is when you go to draw it. 4 marks, put your period here. Halfway is pi over 3. I'm going to indicate the positive 1 and the negative 1. So we're going to start by drawing the cosine. Cosine starts high, ends at its maximum as well. Halfway it's at the minimum, and in between there it's at the zeros. So this is really not the secant graph. The secant graph takes your zeros and turns them into asymptotes. And then we have half of a parabola going up, full down, another half up. You don't need to have anything more than that labeled. You can if that's helpful to you, but that's all you need. Now for tangent, as you know, remember the period is pi over b, not 2 pi over b, and our b value is right there. And so this will be pi over 2. Amplitude we don't have, but we do move this thing down 4. Now for tangent, you have to start on the negative side. Establish the pattern. So double the period. Pi over 2 times 2. You have to double it because you're going to graph for 2. You have to double it because it just makes more sense to draw the graph that way. So we're going to graph it all the way out to pi. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's pi. Pi over 2 is right there. Now the period is really pi over 2. Half of that is pi over 4, which means your first asymptote are going to be at plus or minus pi over 4. And of course for this graph, 1 mark is pi over 4. So our first asymptote will be right there. Now we're also moving this thing down 4, so we should probably indicate where that is. There's 1, there's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. So I've established that I'm counting by negative 1s. You don't need to label them all. It starts to make your graph kind of icky. So we're going to be way down here. The pattern for this goes asymptote 0, it's down of course, then asymptote, then 0, then asymptote. And for tangent, starts up on the right, crosses over, ends up on the left. Now for your sine graph, this has a lot going on. This is your b right here. So our period is going to be 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. Oh, it's 2 pi. Sorry, I didn't even see that pi there. So 2 pi over 2 pi, our period is 1. Sorry. We're going to have to flip this. We have an amplitude of 3. We're also going to move it up 5 and left 1. Wow. So we got to move this thing an entire cycle left. So that means probably the entire graph, the answer, will live on the negative side. You kind of have to come up with a plan here before you start going crazy on your graph. Also with an amplitude of 3, you're already going up 5. You got to make sure you can draw up 8. Ooh, that's a little wiggly. So I'm counting by ones here. I don't think we need to go into the negatives. So if the period is 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's the 1. This is 1/2. So 4 marks is 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's negative 1. Moving this thing up 5. Just trying to get myself set up so I know where my 0 is. I know how high to count up. So 1, 2, 3, I can see where I have 8. I can see where I can go down 3. And I'll move this thing left. I'm going to do this last. So I've got it moved up 5. I got my period. I'm going to flip it over as I graph it. So sine has a 0 in the beginning, the middle, and the end. Sine goes up before it goes down, but we've got to flip it. So we're going to go down 3 because the amplitude is 3. Then we're going to go up 3 because the amplitude is 3. So here's really our graph. Now we're going to move each space left 1, which on this graph is 4. So this is going to move over here. Our next mark moves 4 spaces. This 0 moves to the negative 1/2. This maximum moves to the negative, and then this 0 ends up right on this axis. So we move each space 4, and so the answer is the dark part. For number 11, cotangent. The period, of course, pi over b. So for cotangent, we are dealing with pi over 1. Okay. Amplitude is 2, which we do not care about, but we do care that it moves up 1. Now we're going to double this because it's tangent and cotangent. We've got to draw it twice. So I'm going to go out to 2 pi. Also, I need to indicate where the 1 is, so there it is. I'm moving up 1. Here's -1 in case we need that. Now for cotangent, as you know, the first asymptote is right on that y-axis. So since we're not moving it left or right, it's going to stay there. So that's the first asymptote. Oh wait, I forgot to mark halfway. So the first asymptote is right on the y-axis. And then as you know, it goes asymptote 0. If the width of the graph is pi, then your next asymptote will be at pi, and your final asymptote at 2 pi, and we have another 0. Now, as you know, cotangent curves the other direction, so it starts up high on the left and ends up lower on the right. For the cosecant graph, the period here, again, 2 pi over b, so your b value is the number in front of the x, that's a 1. So the period is 2 pi. This, of course, we have an amplitude of 3. Now that does not apply to the cosecant, but it does apply to the sine. So we want to make sure that we draw that in there. And then we have left pi over 4. You have to go a little bit to the left when you draw your grid. Here's 2 pi, halfway is pi. So it looks like to go left pi over 4, that's half a space. This is a barely moving, because this one's really pi over 2. So we're just moving at half a space. I'm going to put my amplitude on here. So we need to know where up 3 is, and we need to know where down 3 is. You can make that 1 mark or 3 marks, that's up to you. And we are going to graph, of course, the sine curve. Sine starts middle, end at 0. There's no reflection, so it goes up before it goes down. Now I'm going to move all these points. I don't know if you want to connect them. I'm going to move all these points half a space to the left. So that's, I'm going to do this a different color. So here we have this. This one gets moved to here. Back everything up a half a space to the left. And now I'm going to connect the pink points. This is what's going to help me draw the cosecant. The zeros become asymptotes, so the asymptote is -1/4, 3/4, 7/4. This parabola is going to cross over the y-axis, which is allowed. Just keeps going. All right, so for the last problem, cosine. Period is 2 pi over b, 2 pi over 1 over 1/4. So the period is 8 pi. It's going to go down to, we have an amplitude of 3, down 2, and right 3 pi. Ooh, 8 pi plus 3 pi. We're going to have to go far. So I'm going to make sure you have a lot of space to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 8 pi. There's 4 pi. Down 2. I better make this a little bit longer. Here's -1. Here's down 2. Amplitude is 3, so I have to make sure we go down to 5. Each space is 2 pi, so to go to the right 3 pi, here's 10 pi, Here's 12 pi. So we've got to make sure you have enough room to get to that 3 pi. So I'm going to draw the cosine graph first and then move it. So it's going to start up. So 1, 2, 3. It starts up here. At 8 pi, it'll end at 1. At 4 pi, it should be at -5 on the dotted line in those other spots. Now we have to move each thing 3 pi. So it's like a space and a half. So space and a half. So that's the new one. Space and a half. Make sure you have a system when you move these, because sometimes you forget to move one and then it makes the graph really hard to draw. So I can see my little fuzzy dots there. Ooh, a little dipsy. So there we go. That's everything that's on the quiz. Some unit circle stuff, and the rest is graphing. Later.